and welcome to our webcast Shift in Thinking. I'm very happy to welcome our two special guests today. This is Hanna Helmke, the CEO from Right Based on Science, and Michael Spitz, the CEO from Incubator, together with my co-host.
Hi, Sebastian. Yeah, I'm happy to be here on the show today. For those who don't know me, my name is Lucas, and I'm working here at TechQ. I have a great passion for innovation in green tech, so I'm really happy to be in the show today for the second edition on green tech already. After we had a great first edition together with Gemma Green from Power Ledger, where we're talking more about technology. This time we will focus on sustainable business models and policies with our two guests, Hannah and Michael. Up front to today's webcast, I had prepared a short video for those who haven't watched it to give a short recap. In key, currently there's an ongoing discussion about the current crisis and the impact on climate change that it has, and we see a lot of blog posts and discussions going on to that topic. Looking at the dimensions from an economic perspective, the environmental perspective, but also from a social perspective, that's a quite complex discussion that we have there. So still, and also the impact on climate change that the current crisis is not that easy to answer. Looking, for example, at questions like how we can allocate resources from stimulate packages that are freed up and how we invest it into new and into more in the future for climate change. So nevertheless, I'm really happy to see also in the market that there is still a great commitment towards climate change. Looking, for example, at Angela Merkel reaffirmed her commitment towards climate goals, but also seeing from industry, for example, a conference where over 70 companies committed, even during the crisis, to follow up their climate targets and to have an impact on climate change. So with that commitment and also with that discussion, I'm really looking forward to use today and to have two great speakers on the show to dive deeper into what is a sustainable business model, how can we implement it in practice, and also how we can derive new policies that are combine climate change and a recovery of the economy. So our speakers are Hanna Helmke from Right Based on Science, which developed a powerful tool based on XDC, which is a software to measure the impact on climate change for companies and portfolios. Furthermore, we have Michael Spitz, the CEO of the Incubator, who really put their strategy up to the 70 sustainable development goals, and which is a great example from practical context to dive deeper into how we can set up climate change goals and implement it into practical economics. Without further ado, I would like to start with ladies first and welcome Hannah. It's your stage now. Who are you? Let our audience know and tell us how can Right help to set up a sustainable future. Welcome.
Yeah, thank you very much for inviting me to this conversation. It's really a pleasure to be here with you. My name is Hanna. I'm co-founder and managing director of Right Based on Science, which is a Frankfurt-based climate change startup. We are a software and model developer, and what we do is we build an economic climate impact model that determines the contribution of a single economic entity to global warming. The term temperature alignment has come up recently for what we do. So we express the alignment of a company, for example, or a financial portfolio or a country in its alignment with a certain degree pathway. So we're a team of 20 people now, very tech focused, but also focused on the business side to understand really what the market now needs in terms of increasing transparency on climate-related risks and opportunities, and understanding the temperature alignment of a certain company, for example, or a portfolio under different scenarios is definitely a very interesting information for the market in these times. Yeah.
Cool. Michael, I mean, we know each other for quite a while. Incubator and Commerzbank, long-time partner and supporter of TechQuartier. So it's always good to have you on board and discuss. When we had this conversation, I don't know, a couple of weeks ago, you told me about how Mine Incubator was looking at the SDG goals, the Sustainable Development Goals, and what it meant to you and what it actually meant also for your organization. So you went on a journey, right, and looked at what you could do. So that was interesting, right? So really making it serious, looking at it. What were your experiences?
Okay. Yeah, thank you very much for having me on the show. It's a really privilege to be with Hannah here and with you, of course, Sebastian and Lucas. So as the R&D division of Commerzbank Group and the early stage investor, we get exposure to a lot of things in the, let's say, early stage startup side, but also on certain technology. Our mission is fostering lasting technology solution with a purpose. And in a way, we're trying to make sure that with our prototyping, where we look into the various technologies, what do we do and how does that affect, whether it is, additive manufacturing, AI. We just gave up on blockchain and passed it on to the bank, but we're looking in space technology. So we get exposed to a lot of different technologies, and of course, trying to identify how financial services will actually be in the future and how these services will be done. In a way, we have simple tasks when we embarked on that role, like saying, how do we measure our carbon footprint? But even doing this was not as easy, because you really need to start from the ground up. And I think companies like Hannah's and so on are really beneficial in helping larger organizations, but also medium-sized organizations, identify where they really want to be, because you need to really start from the beginning and see how you could make an impact. Because there are certain things, when you look at the 17 UN sustainability goals, the SDG 17, that are easier to fulfill, or that may initially seem easier for parties to make a corporate investment in, or a return. It's a lot easier to talk about how can we save energy, how can we produce carbon neutral energy, and so on, versus how do you make a business case of life underwater? Or how do we basically deal with certain attributes that are more linked to the, let's say, emerging countries, where we in the having the luxury of development countries are already there. But ultimately, we're really trying to go along the way where, as we are one of the largest venture investors as well in the fintech space, we're also trying to identify how can we actually adopt in some of our term sheets, to be very specific, that also the companies that we invest in undergo and support the area of sustainable development goals to the extent they can.
That's very interesting, Michael. Can you maybe elaborate a little more on what it really means? So you said you look into the term sheets, and you really want to support those companies who take these goals seriously and comply with that. Do you think that this is correlated to some extent with the team quality or some other important factors in a company? Is a greener company, so to speak, a more performing, a better company?
Well, I think we don't have sufficient data evidence yet. Nevertheless, we are a firm believer, and we are parties that ultimately support change, Sebastian, where we're trying to identify, only if you have a purpose, only if you ultimately commit to certain longer dated and long-term objective, you will be successful. Of course, there can always be situations where bad management or external factors will have a startup fail. But I think the way, if you set up in line with some of these sustainability goals, it really supports your business case. It really helps you to identify how you're contributing to society. And it's very often, and we found that on a more practical level, you very quickly come to a point, is it a trade-off between a very fast growth? You can basically have a lot of quick wins, but on the long run, you will not be successful. And as we all know, these are not all hockey stick stories. Very often they go through some testing, they go through a lot of issues. So what we're trying to do is having an alignment in the interest of the management that we invest in, that they are aware and supportive and sharing the same passion and the ideas that we share, because otherwise I don't think we are the best partners. There may be other partners for that, but I think only when we have a common interest, then we are aligned.
Thanks a lot. Sounds really interesting. One more question to you, Michael, is what was the most surprising outcome that you have on the journey when implementing these sustainable development goals into your company?
First of all, I would say the journey is never over. So it's always ongoing, and there's things that you discussed. And when we started with areas of prototyping and the started the venture part, I thought this would be our biggest impact because it is more external. But what I realized that at the end of the day, it was much more what we either call community management or the management itself, the little decisions that you take, that I take every day, what kind of stuff we order, how we deal with offering coffee and water and all these little things of offsetting. It's not just the carbon footprint on airplane tickets, but it's much more the little things that are available. And only if you start to look into, are we really doing the right things? That's the first thing that I was surprised that the biggest impact in my organization is actually I can do it myself for the organization, which was shocking to me because I always thought I can get delegated to someone. But it really is the biggest impact that on a day-to-day basis I can do. But the second part is really you have to explain and have to elaborate and share this idea with the staff. You really need to make sure that the entire team buys into this, and then all of a sudden, little by little, things change, and that's what we really found. Where people all of a sudden came around and said, cloud is of course a big issue within financial services, not just financial services. But when you then ask a cloud provider, either of the hyperscalers, okay, so how do you actually, what kind of energy are you using, and can you send us a certificate that this is renewable? And it's interesting that not all cloud providers could do that. And as we are using 14 different cloud providers at the moment, we basically said, okay, let's shut one down or two down if you don't do that. And so you can really take immediate action. And maybe it's not so good because some of my developers said, hold on a second, I need to have that deployment. But I think similarly, as we're trying to make the case for a Green Deal in the EU, we also can make a lot of these measurements without harming significantly, at least in my particular example, the bottom line or the R&D effort.
Hannah, is it easier for purpose-driven companies to recruit top talent?
I would say more and more, yes. So of course, yes. So I would say more and more. So to us, more and more young top talent people come because they're frustrated about their current jobs and about their tasks, and they've more and more identify with the purpose that we actually have in our generation, and that purpose is to make sure we don't destroy this planet. And as we feel that the first destructions are coming along and it just doesn't feel nice, and we don't want to be to blame for this, and we see that with a lot of knowledge and competence and skills, we can actually do something against this. We find something where we are needed, and we find something where we can really make a difference. And all of a sudden, the job in let's say in a normal company or in a normal financial institution is pretty dull compared to what's possible in other companies that are following a purpose, and make sure that this purpose can coexist with for-profit business models, which is a very attractive challenge for a lot of young talent. Yes, I can definitely support this.
Sounds really great. I think that is also what others experience and what I hear. I want to ask you one more question when it comes to the initial topic of that we have for the webcast with the policies and so on. What do you think? How can we set up policies now and also actions? I think Michael gave a great example of how we can apply such actions in a micro scale, but on the bigger level, like defining now policies. How do you think can we set up policies that combine both the recovery of the crisis, but also set the foundation towards a more sustainable future?
Yeah, so when it comes to this foundation of a sustainable future, I believe that this foundation is actually a decoupling of emissions from economic activity. So the economy needs to learn to work with way less emissions than it does actually currently. So what we need to make sure that those policies incentivize the decoupling of economic of economic activity with emissions. And we have enough science and we have enough data and we have enough knowledge to understand, okay, how far, how intensively does the economic activity actually need to decouple from emissions so that it does not depend on a resource that we don't have in a Paris-aligned world anymore. So that actually fits very nicely together because the companies and the whole economy, they need to develop in a way that they don't rely on this resource emissions that is very, very scarce in the future when we want to make sure that we develop in line with the well below 2-degree target. So those recovery plans, in my opinion, they should take this very simple decoupling into account, and they can require from companies to demonstrably show that their development pathways are in line with the science of the Paris Agreement, so they can qualify for financial support. And I believe the effect of this would be that the companies, they don't go back to their business models of the old world and just build them up again. They wrap their quite smart minds around business models of the new world, where they had never capital to invest in, where they never had the real pressure to invest in. So I think now the situation is a massive opportunity to shift a lot of capital into business development innovation, into economic innovation that makes sure that we all learn to create value without using a resource which is going to be very, very scarce in the future. So I think by considering this rate of decoupling and using the science to make sure that companies align with this rate of decoupling when they develop their business with the money that they receive, we would be on a very exciting pathway.
To what extent do we need economic incentives to really speed this whole process up, right? Does it, for example, help if Larry Fink, as CEO of BlackRock, really tells the financial community to be more sustainable, to only support in the future more of the sustainable aware and sustainably operating businesses? Is that an important signal, or how do you maybe both of you, how do you see the the support for a decoupling or more Paris-aligned world?
Maybe
Can
you
I
want
go
to
first, Hannah? Okay.
Okay. Yeah.
So real quick, maybe a couple of stuff. So we have to differentiate between the government idea, then the corporates, and then the individuals. So from a government point of view, and maybe I will be going out on a limb a little bit here. At the moment, a lot of government support is needed because hardship is felt throughout the society, throughout the company. But at the same time, and I think that's right, that governments say, I don't want to get involved in running the business. That's not the role of a government. But at the same time, I think it's a good opportunity that it's not either supporting the corona pandemic, COVID-19, and solving that, and not doing the Green Deal in the EU. I think in some areas you can do both. So you could ultimately say, I'm gonna give you government support, but you need to fulfill certain ESG standards. I think this is a win-win situation, and in the case that the company is saying, hold on a second, I cannot fulfill this. Well, cynically, I would ask, hold on a second. So if you're not believing in the sustainable development goals for your running the business, maybe Corona is not your problem. Maybe you have different problems. I know that's very black and white, and I'm sure there are many areas that is not a fair reflection. But I think the government could take a stance on that one and saying you really should be involved in that. On the corporate level, as you identified, I think if someone like a very large Kapitalsammelstelle like BlackRock, an asset manager, they have a huge impact on, in particular, listed companies. And if they are shifting the focus for whatever reason, I do believe that it has a lot of initiatives that will follow. And only if it is because the CEOs of this world and will basically make sure that they will comply and be able to answer the questions that BlackRock's analysts will ultimately say. And it's not the only one, but what we, as we are an investor in the early stage venture and startup world, this is totally different to the listed companies that see it as part of their not just marketing, but part of their business model to show you how much they have done in the sustainable world, or how they've basically reduced certain emissions. But very often, is that really on the number one thought of the CEO, or is it part of the marketing department? And I think this will gradually change, and things, comments like Larry Fink will actually support this. I mean, and then on a small or individual level or corporate level, just to add what we said in the very beginning, on the venture side, we're trying to see how can we get this into supporting the SDG terminology into that one. On the community building side, on our side, we are not just because of the crisis, but before that, we're already establishing a platform to kind of combine ecosystem on impact investment, which we then refer to as the Impact Festival, making sure that various stakeholders get together and seeing how these thought leaders get together. And on the prototyping side, I already made the comments on what you can do, for instance, cloud computing, but reusability and so on. So I think you can have that in the various fronts, but it's always a case to case, and it's easy for me to sit here and say the government should only support things that are ESG relevant. But I do believe everyone should ask itself the question: is my business model sustainable? Not just in a commercial sense, but does it have a purpose, and does it grant something for the society?
Mm-hmm. When I think it's an interesting point, especially when you say to set up the sustainable business and to talk about with the sustainable development goals about how we get transparency in it. Hannah, what do you think? Or to which extent does transparency play a role, and is there sufficient data that we really can identify sustainable companies and or portfolios, for example?
Yeah, so transparency is one of the most favorite topics that is currently that the people are currently debate around in this ESG field, because it plays a key role in making greenwashing activities fade. So I believe there is a connection between the level of transparency and the room for greenwashing in this market. So let me give you an example here. Many companies, including companies from the oil and gas sector, for example, Shell or Total or BP, they have set themselves the target to become neutral in 2050. So first of all, this sounds great because according to the IPCC 1.5 degree scenario, we have to be at zero emissions in 2050. So we can only emit as many emissions as the planet can absorb. So that sounds great. But then when you look twice, you don't find any information about the transparency on how the companies actually want to get to zero in 2050. Which is actually necessary to understand if they decarbonize along a well below 2 degree pathway. So a company theoretically could significantly increase emissions by 2049 and then compensate everything in 2050, and it would be carbon neutral. So congratulations. But this has nothing to do with being Paris aligned. So we always have to combine those statements that the companies are that they are putting out on the market right now in order to get good ESG scores, in order to comply with the expectations of their stakeholders. And since it's now more and more about reputation, this is getting more traction and relevance. So yeah, in my opinion, is we can tackle this issue by being much more precise in what we ask from the companies to disclose. So we work a lot with this information. And since we calculate whether a company is on a Paris-aligned pathway, yes or no, we really know the data points. And what they currently disclose is just not important for this kind of analysis. So if they report stuff, it should be valuable for understanding for external parties whether this leads them to develop along the lines of the Paris Climate Agreement, yes or no. So we would need much more precision here on the actual emission reduction pathways, on the actual activities, how this is impacting the business, and how they make sure that they develop into something that is functioning in a world shaped by climate change. Yeah, and this is why transparency is a key role, because without transparency, we cannot derive material data points that are necessary for making big decisions in the real economy and in the financial world.
Okay. What do you think, like when talking about the data points, what would you wish to that policies maybe that being set, like that are set up so that there is more data available? What kind of data do you need, or what information needs to be more transparent?
Yeah, so here we have still a lot to do. There's really a lot of work to be done. And even if most providers promise to have all the answers to sustainable investment and to disclosing the SDGs, in my opinion, we have only started understanding what data points are necessary, what is able and what is available, and how we can integrate them into broad decision making. So in my opinion, the answer to what data is missing is actually pretty simple. Quality assured data is missing. That's what we're missing. So data that can consider uncertainty, for example, data that is ready to be used for big decision making, and data that we can trust. And such data either comes from valid direct resources or sophisticated models that can be used, for example, for uncertainty analysis. So I wish actually we had a much more honest conversation about those data points, about what is a high quality data point and how can we collaborate together to establish those data points before we come to ESG ratings and all of this. I think we don't, the reason why the reason for not having, or no, so the reason why the different ESG data providers provide so different ratings for each companies is because we don't have this honest conversation about what is a high quality data point and what can be eventually used for decision making.
Michael, what's your opinion on it? I mean, you invested in one of the companies that is also collecting data to improve transparency. Can you share some of the insights, your view?
Yeah, absolutely. So yes, we as a group invested in, for instance, in Arabesque, and we very clearly focus on how do you actually define transparency and what is there. And I can only echo what Hannah just said. I mean, yes, we are on a good path. We are starting there, but it is relatively easy. First of all, which companies are we reporting on? Traditionally, it's listed companies, so it's a very small subset of the market. So it's not the entirety, and it's these large corporations will not necessarily save the planet. So it's got to be, how do we get all of that? Then there are areas, to be very specific, on CO2 footprint. How do you measure it? Yes, there are some interpretation, but I would say this is actually relatively easy to do. But when you coming into areas of social and governance, and this may be in a European context even a little bit contradictory, because ultimately you need to kind of trace data of employees and of clients. Well, this is, in our current thinking, this may be violating privacy issue. This may be violating GDPR area. So this is a trade-off basically between how much privacy do you want and want to give, and how much transparency do you want. So this is when third parties come in, where you validate certain information. And that's why I think we are just in the beginning. And that's why I totally share what Hannah just said. But there are other areas we work closely with the Refinitives and so of this world that provide you data points. Now, I think you need to identify, number one, where does the data come from? And then you need to be able to kind of analyze and validate the data, not just from the quality point of view, but also what are you going to interpret and do with the data, because you have a lot of people spinning certain information because it may sound obvious, but there is some interoperability or some connectivity that ultimately may just not as well be. But as you never end with a negative thing, I think we are on a good path, but there's still a lot of things that we can improve, and it's people like Hannah, it's young people also in my shop that are really, for them it really matters and they're passionate, and I can only, what Hannah said about making sure you get the right people, it's a talent of war. I think in particular the younger generation, it really is important what your purpose is, and if you have differentiating factors, if you have a product that is unique, of course clients will buy it. If it's a commodity like banking or insurance, where pretty much doesn't matter whether you get it from a blue bank, a yellow bank, a red bank, or a green bank, you ultimately need to show to your clients, but also to your employees, what's the purpose? Why are you doing it? And are you basically contributing to society and to a better world?
Thanks a lot. I think that was a great conversation. A lot to do, still to do, but we are on the right path, right? We know that purpose is the new currency, right? And connecting that to a sustainable future makes a lot of sense from an economic perspective, from a personal perspective. And let's work together and move forward to really align all the different activities and incentives towards a sustainable future. Thanks a lot, Hannah. Thanks, Michael. This was our last webcast in this season. Yeah, we had a lot of fun. I hope you had also a lot of fun. We had that much fun, Lucas, that we really want to continue this. Plan second season. So we'll have a short pre-summer break, and then we'll get back to you. We'll let you know about our next editions and new ideas.
Yes, thank you for the great feedback.
Thank you a lot, and see you soon.